Josh, why do they keep killing my babies?
I'm so sorry for you, Scott Telford.
Oh my god! I've never been so legitimately just sad about a video game release in quite some time, where you just sit there, you're trying to play it, you're trying to enjoy it, and there's so many aspects that should just line up, and then there's just something in the middle, various core aspects of the production, or the gameplay feel, the mechanics, whatever, that just collapse the entire thing around it. And there's something about being so close to perfection and then getting it wrong that is unbelievably annoying and off-putting. And yes, there's many things to break down about the Callisto Protocol, but I've never been so gutted in quite some time.
And it's such a shame, because I feel like you, alongside so many other people, were looking forward to this game so much. You know, literally last week, in a podcast which has not aged well, I was talking about how this game seemed like a slam dunk. Out of the 3 games that released on Friday, this, Midnight Suns, and Need for Speed Unbound, no one could have guessed that it would be Callisto that's coming in a little disappointing. But Scott Telford, I'm not going to project my feelings onto the game. I have not played the game. I am here as an impartial observer, and I just want you to tell me about your experience so far with the game, because if I'm correct, you have quit it outright at this point, because it's not where you want it to be.
Yeah, it feels like because obviously already, director Glenn Schofield and Craxton, I've already called the various teams, Striking Distance, other developers, they're already on Twitter just saying, we hear you, we're going to fix some stuff, we absolutely get it. And I think that's mainly in response to the PC performance. There's already been a patch that went up, I think it was yesterday, Sunday, just trying to address PC performance, because initially that game was just a flip book on PC. It was ridiculous. However, the problems are way more core than that, and it's one of those things where, like, the exact thing that's making people pissed off and running the other way and just, oh my god, this is broken, is the dodge mechanic. A lot of people didn't already like the feel of combat in the first place, and the whole game is based around, or the melee side of the game is based around using the left analog stick to evade. So you either hold left or hold right, and you can pre-bake it. You can hold left or right and wait for the animation to come in, and then you should always dodge. You have to alternate. If you press left and then dodge, you have to hold right for the next one, and you just keep doing that for up to about 4 strikes with certain enemies. Or you can push down to block, but it won't absorb all the damage. So there's almost no point blocking, because you'll still get hit, and Jacob goes down in like 2 or 3 hits anyway. So that's the premise, and I don't mind that. When they first introduced it, I was like, okay, I can totally get with this. Like, I saw the GameSpot 5 out of 10 review, I saw the various reviews doing the rounds of, oh my god, the combat's terrible, and then the first couple of fights I was dodging, I was attacking, it was fine. However, there are massive issues with a lack of invincibility frames, and when you start fighting multiple enemies or bigger enemies, they'll go to hit you and you'll dodge. You'll see the dodge animation happen, but as they are flailing past you, if any part of them still catches you, it just triggers the canned death animation anyway.
Right.
So, and various people have shared various clips of, even when you're maybe going up against an environmental hazard where you've dodged an enemy and then they get taken out by something, if part of them still hits you as they're getting wiped out, it still cuts to them killing you anyway. And it's just like, okay, so this is just broken then. And it just feels like in that specific dodge mechanic, they need to do more with, like I said, invincibility frames, or just more tightening up of the dodge in itself. It doesn't work in close quarters, because like you've already got that problem of if an enemy hits you at all, if its hitbox crosses over with you at all, it triggers the death animation or it does damage. In close quarters, in corridors, in just the way the levels are designed, you're always coming up against something when you're trying to dodge. You're not locked into a canned animation of you definitely dodging the swing. You're just moving to the side, and then maybe you're hitting something or whatever it is. You just can't avoid dying over and over and over again.
Right.
And there are some encounters. There's one specific encounter in like a machine room, when you flick this switch and there's a whole bunch of machinery comes to life that should be really, really fun, and you can throw dudes into parts of the environment, but I, like many other people, have done that encounter about 20 times, just trying to get through it, getting spat at from enemies from across the room. There's more to talk about that's so broken with the combat, but that's one of the main parts of it.
And I just didn't expect that. I thought at the very least, the game might not be the longest, might not be the most expansive, but I really thought going into it that the core combat model would have been locked down, especially with the gameplay trailers that they had shown off, with highlighting the dodge mechanic in particular. I thought that was a neat little addition, but it sounds like it just causes more havoc than it does joy.
It's just the idea of it. I think a lot of people already bounced off the almost rhythmic feel of it, and I don't mind it. Like, you say you get the dodge right, you can then counterattack with a string of your own melee hits, and then you have to wait. You can only do so many hits. Because if you get too carried away, then an enemy will just tank the hit and hit you anyway, which is another part of the really frustrating stuff. Is that maybe you've successfully done a dodge, and then you wait and see if they're going to swing again. Okay, they don't. I'll start hitting them. Sometimes they just go back into into another attack animation and just tank the hit and hit you anyway, which can be really, really annoying. But there is almost like a rhythmic feel to your attacks. There's sort of like a lumbering kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
You can speed it up, you can get different upgrades for it, but already people didn't like the feel of that.
With that in mind, though, you're saying that it's kind of a little bit divisive. Some people don't like that. If they sorted out some of the issues with the invincibility frames,
yes,
for instance, would that base be good? Is there something there that could be enjoyable with a few fixes?
I would say
no?
so.
Right.
It's just getting rid of the frustration side of it. There's always that core thing in games of what have I done wrong? Why did I just die? Like, you know, and if you can't learn from that, then it only compounds over time. Because one thing is, I was watching Maximilian Dude, who's like a big sort of fighting game streamer, big streamer in general, and they were just trying to figure out, because you always have that headspace of like, you know, where am I going wrong? What can I do to mitigate damage? How am I figuring out the animations? You try and, you know, give the game so much slack. And when so much stuff is going well, in regards to the character models, the general setup, the story, whatever, you want to just figure it out. And you always feel like it's you, even if it's not. And it's one of those things where I just watched him kind of quit out of it. And I was in the exact same headspace. I was just like, how much of this is me? How much of this is the game? Because they've not even got, you know, enemy awareness icons or anything. So you just sort of, you go into these combat encounters, you try and fight something. You try and engage with what is ostensibly like a punch-out style back and forth.
Right.
Like, you know, deflect a little bit, hit a few more times, deflect a little bit more, take some dudes out. And that could be really, really fun, and I like the idea of using that as a differentiator from Dead Space. Like, it doesn't feel like Dead Space at all, because it does have this more melee focus to it. However, it is fundamentally a one-on-one combat model that absolutely falls apart in the group encounters, and that's alongside just the general sort of just various things that feel like it just needs a patch. Like, you get audio diaries in this game, as is the case in various survival horrors or whatever, but you can't move around while listening to them, unless you pause and then unpause, and then you can walk around listening to them. So it's like, that feels kind of weird. I mentioned damage allocation before, the fact that you go down in, like, you know, 3 to 4 hits or whatever. Enemies take way more hits than they feel like they should. Like, you're removing limbs and heads and everything, and they're still coming at you, whilst you go down in a handful of hits. But there is just, you know, the health animation takes forever for you to actually get any health back. There's just that side of it where it's like, this could be polished like a little bit more. There's just a general, you know, like frustrating core to it that absolutely drags it down.
I've heard a lot about like the cheapness of the combat as well. You know, I've seen a lot of discourse online about the jump scares in particular coming
doing
out of
damage
and doing you damage, and then you being like, well, there was no way I could have seen that. That was not telegraphed. There's no way to dodge. It's just a cheap death. Then I have to restart from a checkpoint and go through. Is that as prominent as I have been led to believe?
I've not died to a jump scare yet, but they do damage. So if you come out of a general encounter on low health anyway, and there's a scripted jump scare down the next corridor, then yes, you will just die to that encounter. And another thing that goes alongside that is the checkpoint thing. If you have a checkpoint and then you upgrade a bunch of weapons and then you do an encounter, and you die in that encounter, you've got to respec all your weapons again, because the checkpoint is before you did anything. You can manually save, but it doesn't do anything. It just treats it as the previous checkpoint. So that's a whole other thing. Just things like that I sort of point to and go, you guys would have figured this out if you had a little bit more time in development. And it just sucks because it feels like a game that's been in development for a long time. It feels premium. Like, it looks absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to talk about is how absolutely immaculate the marketing's been. Because obviously the cast, you have Josh Duhamel in the main role, you have Karen Fukuhara's in there as well. There is this idea that it is almost kind of like B-tier actors, but recognizable, lovable actors who are like heading this thing up, especially Karen Fukuhara from The Boys. And there was Gwendolyn Christie and Michael Ironside in the prequel podcast. That got me in immediately, and I listened to the entirety of the prequel podcast, which, to be honest, wasn't that good. But still, you had incredible talent lending their names to this thing, and I feel like Glenn Schofield himself has been out there doing interviews on Wired and various other YouTube channels and everything to raise awareness of Callisto Protocol. They nailed all that stuff, only for the actual core bit to not land, and I feel like it was a big red flag when there was no review codes out before launch, which is always the case. I just gave in and bought the game ahead of time because I saw it was a little bit cheaper on one of the outlets online, and I thought I might as well just see if maybe it'll get delivered a day early or something, and I just sort of went for it. And it was just like that general feel of, we should have just waited. There was always that feeling of something not really lining up when everything else is going down a certain direction, and then the game itself just, you know, they're holding back.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I saw one of those like 5 out of 10 reviews, or that like Skill Up just saying he doesn't recommend it or whatever, there was just like, okay, something is up with this game. And there's obviously the performance side of it on PC, but there's also just that weird, like I said, various things, various aspects of polish that just need to be a lot more considerate of a player's time.
Well, how's the rest of it? You've talked a lot there about like the actual combat, and obviously that's the main thing you do, but when it comes to, you know, like the level design, you said it looked beautiful. Does it feel like there is something worthwhile there if you get the combat right? Like, how's the story? How is the environment design? How is the general atmosphere? Does all that stuff kind of come together is it just this kind of a core pillar that falls down?
Where I am right now, it's full of promise. It's hilarious because I kind of know from what people have said that the story doesn't really get there over time.
Right.
However, at the beginning, it was giving me big The Suffering vibes.
Ooh.
Which is like the whole idea of like a planet being overtaken by some sort of evil demonic force and all the prisoners reacting to it, and sort of going from there. The prison side of it gets out the way pretty damn fast. You have the whole sort of prison takeover thing, and then you're just into the idea of what if a bunch of mutated monsters just attack this place and trying to survive and everything, which I like as a general setup, and I don't mind the stuff that they're seeding. Like, you can go off the beaten path and find more audio logs. You can find stuff from the warden and kind of get a little hint as to kind of like that dude's role and what was going on, and those things are good. Like, so far, those things are promising enough. But yeah, in terms of the level design, it's a lot of shimmying, it's a lot of getting around in that way, it's a lot of an old school feel, even though it looks absolutely stunning. So there is that, and like, obviously they have to find a way to railroad you into the jump scares and find a way to push you towards the parts that are more designed. Like, there are a couple of more action set pieces. There's a bit at the beginning where the ship's crashing and you're climbing up this debris.
Yeah.
That just goes on for ages. You're just holding it up on the analog stick. So I've not really minded that stuff too much because it just kind of feels like, well, you're like almost a first-time team. I know that obviously the devs are veterans. Like, Schofield was responsible for Dead Space, Dude Kim for Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. You kind of have that, but I was like, it's a little team that could kind of thing. I think there's enough of that in there where it's like, well, go you guys, look how much you've managed to do. But yeah, the actual level design side of it, I've not minded because it feels like such a deliberate throwback to 2007 and Dead Space in terms of a setup, and then it's obviously what they do from there. But yeah, I've not minded that stuff too much. It's just the fundamentals. It's just there's nothing I could have done to prevent that.
Yeah.
And now I'm dead, and that just sucks across all games.
And the fundamentals are fundamental for a reason.
Yes.
Like, you need to get that stuff right in order to have a game that people want to stick with. Like, you can have the prettiest looking game in the world, but we've seen games like The Order 1886 in the past, these beautiful, immaculate looking games with stellar presentation that have wonky combat or terrible combat that kind of drags everything else down. And it, like you keep saying this, Scott, it's just a shame this time. This has happened again.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out as well that as much as they're advertising a 12 to 14 hour runtime, a lot of people have finished it in about 7 to 8 hours, so it feels like the 12 to 14 is more based on rerunning it on different difficulties. They've already said that 2023 is full of story expansions and various things they're going to be adding on, so it's like there is a franchise plan here, which also kind of ties in with that idea of how much could you get out the door initially and how much are you going to be doing going forward. But I guess we'll have to just wait and see. How bad is that on the recording?
That must be bad.
That's
definitely bad.
Oh my
God. That's bad.
As you can maybe hear underneath our voices, parts of this office are falling apart. But still, it just means that Glenn Schofield...
What is that?
Glenn Schofield's trying to get in. Say nice things about the game. I will. Hopefully they fix the game. Hopefully things get patched. There are various fundamentals that just need to be sorted out. And I just hope and pray that's the case. I've spent the money. I'm about 4 hours in. And I hope they fix it. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, Glenn.